Very good. All right, let's cover Umbrella and we'll talk through what the API structure looks like and how we're going to be using it in the lab. Most people on this call at least, but most people in the room kind of understand what Umbrella is and how it works. So we don't have to kind of go through the background of, what it is and why it is a product, but it's helpful to kind of talk through, where it evolved from and, what the initial OpenDNS acquisition was wholly focused on that left portion, that DNS layer security. But over the last 4 or 5 years, you can see that we've added quite a bit of functionality within the Umbrella space and made it a true SSE platform. So adding things like secure web gateway or full proxy, cloud delivered firewall CASB functionality, and there's more on here that aren't even included on this slide. But with the expansion of those additional services.
Brian, just one note before I forget, guys, for anyone, I know we have some specific product specialists here, right, that are going to be helping with this event potentially, or any other people that you will engage for this. I would just suggest I do it always the same. I just refer to the latest TDM deck to kind of brush up on the messaging for specific product. So while Brian is going through this, that's what I wanted to say. On Sales Connect, there is always a fresh TDM deck with usually a walkthrough recording by the TME to get an overview if there is a product that you're not necessarily covering on your daily basis and you just need a little more information about it.
Yeah, that's good.
Sorry, Brian.
Mm-hmm. No, that's perfect. Yeah, I sometimes take that for granted that people just understand the whole portfolio and not knowing that they come from a specific part of the business. So that's good information to know. So continuing the additional services have been added through time, and we've also expanded the API functionality to address those additional services. And unfortunately, the product will show it, but we've got a little bit of growing pains, I guess, if you will, with the Umbrella API security portfolio, just because of the way that the product has evolved so quickly, and we're trying to now play catch up to make sure that the API structure supports the functions that have been added to the product. So we'll look at what that looks like and how it works. And then obviously, as the slide mentions, this plays into the broader security portfolio by allowing you to query things within Umbrella about which users interacted with which domains, which IP addresses are being accessed by the individuals on your network. You can also use the API to pull in the devices, such as SD-WAN or mobile devices, so you can get intelligence and provide some protection for those devices as well. And obviously, everything feeds into SecureX as our integrated security platform for things like dashboarding and threat intelligence as well. Umbrella, again, provides that kind of key capability of being an on-ramp for secure access to the internet. And this is not just from a URL or DNS perspective. This allows us to do a lot of additional capabilities, including file and web inspection. There, as you can see, we can do offloading of some of the traffic that we don't know about to make sure that it's valid traffic and it's not malicious. If we see a file that we don't know about, even with an Umbrella, we can pass that over to secure malware analytics for some additional sandboxing capabilities. We have a lot of granular policy control within Umbrella, everything from, can this user access this domain to things like content controls. So, they can access anything within the, social media domain, but if it's gambling related, then we're going to prevent access from those. This is also expanding, again, as I mentioned, with the addition of additional functions like the cloud delivered firewall. We're putting some additional policy controls in place within the Umbrella platform, and then you can control those things either using the GUI or using the APIs. So as I mentioned, the APIs as they are today there's essentially two distinct groups of APIs. We've recently introduced a new set of API capabilities that are called open APIs, and I'll talk about those here in a minute. But the ones that are represented here on this slide are the legacy APIs that have been developed as the product has evolved. So you can see there's multiple endpoints that provide usually a single function represented as an API. So if you're dealing with adding or onboarding devices into Umbrella, you use that network device API. If you're doing some investigative techniques like identifying the whether a domain is malicious or benign, you can use the investigate API. Enforcement API is designed to be able to create block lists or allow lists that would prevent domains that don't have a specific disposition, there we go, and allow the users to either access those, or if it's a business rule and you don't want people to be able to access a specific domain, you can use that enforcement API as well. And then other things such as, who accessed what is done through the reporting API, or modifying users within the platform is done through that management API. So I covered this on the previous slide. I'd be remiss, and Yaron would probably yell at me if I didn't talk about the new open APIs. The open APIs were introduced, I think, in October of last year, and they are changing the way that we interact with Umbrella from an API perspective. We'll see on the next slide, kind of where we were and where we are today. But several of the APIs have now been updated and modernized, I guess, to the point where we don't have to have those disparate individual endpoints. We have one endpoint, and we can utilize these different use cases all from that one API.umbrella.com. So rather than having that standalone management API, that functionality has been brought into the open APIs. Same with that network API, network device API. Then policies, that's enforcement API, and then reporting API, again, which used to be standalone, is now integrated into the open API structure. Now, that doesn't include, there's, I think, a total of 8 API endpoints within Umbrella. Not all of the functionality has been brought under this open API construct, but we're getting there. We're getting to the point where more of that functionality will be brought into the same endpoints. And so rather than creating a specific API key for that one function that's tied, and all of your activity is tied to that one API key, you'll have kind of this ability to create an API key that has different rules and scopes, so that you can limit down, what people can do with that API key while not granting access to that entire API. So on the next slide, so you can see what we're in the process of doing is again modernizing the way that we interact with Umbrella from an API perspective. A lot of the APIs that we would create were essentially universal. So we would create one key, and then everybody that had access to that key could make use of that API in whatever way they wanted to. There wasn't a way to do, read write or read only. And if that key was ever compromised or needed to be refreshed, every place that you implemented that key would have to be replaced. Also, the individual that had that access to that key was making requests across the entire platform. And with the open APIs, again, you can restrict down the ability for that user to only query specific functions or to make changes on specific items within the platform rather than granting access to the entire platform. The other kind of stumbling block that a lot of was challenging for people using the API was that it was tied to your organization ID. And so you had to specify your organization ID every place that you made an API request. And they've fixed that process now. So the organization is known by the key that was created. And so you don't have to manually specify the organization key anymore. It's determined by how you authenticate to api.umbrella.com. All right, the ones that we're going to be using in the lab today are still based on the legacy keys though. So there are two authentication processes. One's for enforcement. And on the next slide, we talk about the Investigate API. So enforcement, again, this API, you generate a key within the Umbrella dashboard, and then you will then utilize that customer key when you're submitting a request to the enforcement API with a domain name that you want to either block or allow or add to a block or allow list. And then on the next page, the Investigate API, as we talked about earlier, is utilized when we want to investigate kind of the, what Umbrella knows about a specific domain name. And so what we do is we harvest those domain names from secure malware analytics during the lab. And we can say, give me a list of all of the domains that this supposed piece of malware reached out to when it was executed in the sandbox or detonated in the sandbox. And then we have that list of API, or not APIs, we have that list of domain names, and then we can ask Umbrella what it knows about those domain names through its integration with Talos. So we submit a request saying, hey, tell me what you know about this domain name, and it will return a value from -1, meaning malicious, to 1, meaning known good. And then there's a variation in between there. And if we determine the URL to be malicious, then we can, again, make sure that it's blocked. So subsequent users don't inadvertently reach out to that domain. That brings us to our hands-on exercise. That's just a quick primer on kind of how the Umbrella APIs work. And with that, Oksana, do you want to pull up the hands-on lab?